Ah, hello. Welcome. So today I want to take a little bit of time to read some channeled wisdom that came in from the Greek goddess Nammu. So before I read the channeled wisdom, I want to just speak a little bit to who this great goddess is, how I've come to know her. So within the last week, I was led to a book that was released this year called The Goddess Bible. And so in this book is a bunch of translations of sacred texts, of letters, of testimonials from the goddess people who lived in the Fertile Crescent in the time before the Romans invaded, in the time before now, right? In the eras before this modern era, in the time before Judaism, or when that religion was being born. And Great Mother Nammu, the Allmother, was perceived by these goddess people to be the one who birthed all. From her sacred womb, from her sacred yoni, from her sacred vulva, she birthed all of life. And in their wisdom tradition, she is the way that we honor her is through pleasure. The language that they used to describe where we live, this planet called Earth, was Great Nammu's pleasure garden. Great Nammu gifted us her pleasure garden in their belief system. And so our role as devotees to this Allmother Nammu was to give her offerings of pleasure. And so the way that these people worshipped is so different from our own, right? Their way that they related with their bodies was so different from their own, because they saw their bodies as sacred. They saw their bodies as sacred vessels for which to experience pleasure and send that pleasure up to the goddess. They were a matriarchal culture. They were not ashamed of their bodies. They were not repressing their sexuality or their desires. In fact, they were honoring them, and they saw this exchange of pleasure as a way of honoring the goddess. And so it really seems to offer us a very different way of understanding ourselves, of understanding our bodies, of understanding this planet, of understanding our role, of understanding what is sacred, of understanding what we can have access to, right? Because in a perspective where pleasure is an offering that we give the goddess, all of a sudden, right, the way that we live currently, right, a way that we live currently, which is often really, really seeped in the energy of suffering, right, is quite in opposition, right, to the way that these goddess people, these pleasure people would have lived, right? It is almost sacrilege, right, to live a life without pleasure. And so after I read this book, which I highly recommend, I think Ashira Bell is the name of the author, The Goddess Bible, I felt really moved to write this, or rather, Great Nammu, the Great Allmother, urged me to write this. And so I share it with you, The path has always been calling me home to the knowing, the remembering that we are all one, that within us we carry the source of all power, the power of love, the power of pleasure and bliss, pure devotional sacred love, the love before all, the love that birthed all, the one that became the many, the one that lived before anything, the one that birthed the many. The many delighted in the gardens of her pleasure. They did feast and rejoice, and happily they lived. They lived happy lives. But then they were taken from the garden, and the garden was burned. They forgot the many were from one. They harmed and they pillaged. And from them they took all the power that was always within. She sheltered her children as best she could, but forever she watched them burnt down or surrender their knowing and power and connection to source, to her. Choosing to empower false gods only. Choosing to empower false gods who only worship death and fire and lust and revenge. The way of the ego is disguised as the way. But today we remember. The collective awakening is upon us. It is time to return to the way of the goddess, the way of the lady. She is here now in all of her forms, the Allmother and her daughters. She is here now, waiting for her delighted rainbow children to come forward into her pleasure gardens and once again give offerings of deep, ecstatic pleasure. We are invited to live pleasure forward, to come home to the divinity, which is the experience of our pleasure, the pure, ecstatic delight sent out into the universe to vibrate in delight and ecstasy for eternity, delighting and pleasuring countless others on its way. We are the pleasure people, the people of pleasure. The ones who experience pleasure on earth are gifted pleasure garden. We are in the kingdom of heaven always when we connect with the bliss of ecstatic pleasure and delight. Live delighted. Love delighted. Choose to feel tickled and delighted. It is time to laugh with an open heart and give joyously. It is time to remember the pleasure way and to stay open and connected to the divinity of the world and all the people and creatures who live in pleasure here. Live now as if the only goal was pleasure. What would be most pleasurable? Oh, so that message from Great Nammu came in, and I hope it lands with you. Please let me know by hitting that like button, leaving me a comment below. If you wish to receive channeled messages for yourself, please reach out to me, schedule a free call. We can figure out what makes sense. There's so much wisdom to be had if we are willing to slow down, tune in, and listen. So I hope this finds you well and encourages you to reclaim your right to feel pleasure here on earth in this body of yours, this body that is delighted to feel pleasure, that has the capacity to delight in earthly pleasures and see those pleasures not as bad or sinful as wrong, but to see them as gifts, as offerings that we give this world, as frequencies that we send out into the ether so that all can experience this vibrant, blissful pleasure. We have been gifted the pleasure gardens and are invited to remember once again the way of pleasure. Yeah.